Healing My Disabled Husband Novel Chapter 12 Digging the Truth Out Personally. In the morning, Camden came to Patrick's room, saw him staring at the ceiling in a daze, and asked, "Pat, do you really decided to let Amy give you treatment?" Patrick heard the words and looked towards Camden and asked, "You don't trust her, Grandpa? Amy is a good girl, and she is very serious about her work, but I hope to find more experts to consult with you, so as to formulate a better plan," Camden said. Amy was here last night. Although Camden was really happy that Patrick accepted the doctor to treat him, he still thought in his heart that he had to find the most authoritative doctor. He still had his own concerns about Amy's medical skills. He didn't have any problems with Amy, and he was satisfied in very way with her being Patrick's wife. However, Camden had also investigated. Although Amy graduated from the most authoritative medical institution, she was only an ordinary doctor with mediocre qualifications in an Israel General Hospital. Except for a few major operations completed with her tutor, there were some surgeries which were not very difficult when she was the major surgeon. Camden really can't completely let Amy treat Patrick. Amy told me she will assist a specialist to take care of you. I think that's fine, he said. Patrick looked at Camden deeply, knowing that he didn't know anything about Amy. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Camden say, "Pat, I asked someone to go to Esnia and ask Dr. Detlef to come over. If you don't want to see other doctors, at least let him do a checkup for you, okay?" Patrick was silent. Looking at his grandfather's expectant eyes, he didn't have any reasons to refuse in the end. He said, "As long as you're happy with that." Camden finally felt at ease. Patrick was thinking something else, and suddenly didn't want to expose Amy's ability as for what secret Amy was hiding. He wanted to discover it bit by bit. Amy just came out of the operating room when she received a call from Jayla. "Amy, why haven't you done what I asked you to do for me yet?" Jayla's tone was very unfriendly. She didn't say hello, but came up with a question first. Holding the phone, Amy said, "Jayla, Camden worries about Patrick Hayden's condition every day. He and I can't talk at all. As for the person you mentioned, I can't see him at all." She made her voice sound submissive, soft with trembling, as if she was terribly afraid of the person on the other end of the phone. "I don't care about the reasons you said. Amy, don't forget, without our family, you would have died outside. I'll give you another night. If you can't do it again, we'll see." After Jayla yelled at her, she hung up the phone. Amy frowned and looked at the black screen of the mobile phone. After returning to her office, she called someone. "Check it out for me. What is the teleplay Global Hiv Pictures is going to shoot, and who is the heroine?" The other end quickly replied, "Amy, it's an adaptation of a fantasy novel written by Rosie Hawkins. The heroine has not yet been decided. Is there no decision, or is there something wrong with the person who makes the decision?" Amy asked. "Amy, don't be so sharp. According to the information I received, the heroine has actually been decided. She is the youngest daughter of Maxwell Chandler of Global Hiv Performing Arts Department, Ava Chandler. But Miles Hayden puts it off, so it has not been officially announced." Amy quickly figured out the relation. Maxwell wanted to support his daughter but offended Miles. There was a deadlock because he couldn't find a suitable candidate. She twitched the corner of her mouth lightly, quietly typed a line of words on the phone, and put the phone back in her pocket. Half an hour later, after Jayla finished shooting, her agent Tia walked over happily and said to her excitedly, "Jayla, you are going to be famous. I'm tired of hearing this. Can I get something new?" Jayla took a thermos cup Tia handed over, unscrewed the cap and took a sip. The warm jujube tea made her comfortable all over. "This time it's real. We got the role you've always wanted," said Tia. Jayla was startled for a moment, then smiled, and said, "Isn't that what it should be? I've told you that my sister married Patrick Hayden. It's a matter of course that Global Hiv Pictures gave me the role." Although she said so, Jayla's eyes were filled with darkness. Amy, that little bitch. She had already given her time to figure out the role for her, but Amy didn't do it right away. After she called her and scolded her, Amy then took care of the thing for her. She was really a bitch. If Amy dared pretend to be awkward with her in the future, she was gonna get her in trouble. Jayla was so lost in her own thoughts that she didn't notice the strangeness in Tia's eyes. Tia said, "But Jayla, the director personally selected you, and he also said if the heroine is not played by you, he will not shoot." Jayla's expression froze upon hearing this, and she looked at Tia in disbelief. "Tia, are you sure?" Jayla asked. "Of course. I just received a phone call from the director himself. He told me so himself. There can be a lie," Tia said. Jayla squeezed the thermos cup unconsciously and instantly looked angry. Sure enough, counting on that slut will accomplish nothing at all. Just now, she just put the credit on Amy, but in the end, she still had to rely on herself to get the role. Jayla snorted coldly and said to Tia, "What about Global HIV Pictures? Can they give the director such an important say?" Tia said indifferent, "You don't have to care what they do. Now you just need to know that this role is yours, and you can join the filming group. When this is broadcast, you will become a first-line actress. As for other, it's not something we need to care." Jayla thought the same too, nodded and said, "Then Tia, let's sign the contract as soon as possible." On the other side, after calling Tia, Francis Snyder called Amy. "Amy, I just lost my face. Just tell me how you plan to compensate me." Francis had been in the industry for more than 20 years. Although he had already become a director with absolute right to speak, he had always relied on his absolute director ability, and he had never done anything that was so cheap today. Actually, he was like a shrew, made a scene in front of the investors and insisted on choosing actors by himself. As long as he remembered what he had done just now, he would feel ashamed and flustered. Amy had already boarded a taxi back to the Hayden's mansion, heard what Francis said, and replied, "I'll cut it for you." Francis immediately became happy, and quickly said to Amy, "It's a deal. Don't go back on your word." Chapter 13. He should suffer from the pain himself. After hanging up the phone, Amy rested her chin with her hands and looked out the window with an uncontrollable joy. She didn't want to complicate her relation with the Hayden family, and she didn't want to have any interest in them. So, she wouldn't ask the Hayden about how Jayla eager to acquire the role, but she will not really give Jayla such a free lunch. In Francis' words, Jayla had a fake face and incompetent acting skills. She just needed to be a useless actress in online dramas, but she had to be ambitious herself. Then she would let her have this opportunity, and then let her lose it. Those of the Reed family should also know what a dramatic change was. Amy went back to Hayden's mansion, put down her things, and went to Patrick's room. Patrick's complexion was particularly bad today, paler than the previous few days. Camden hadn't noticed it in the morning, but when he came back in the afternoon, seeing his grandson's pale face, his heart ached instantly. Seeing Amy come in now, he eagerly pulled her over. "Amy, look at Pat. Why was he fine yesterday, but today he looks so bad?" Amy naturally knew what was going on, but she couldn't show it. After checking Patrick's body according to the routine procedure, Amy said to Camden, "Grandpa, don't worry. There is nothing wrong. Maybe Mr. Hayden just didn't sleep well last night." Amy had a guilty conscience. She knew that the reason for Patrick's face was probably because he painful, but she didn't understand why Patrick didn't say anything. She was all ready. If Patrick told Camden that he could feel pain, Camden would call several experts for consultation to determine Patrick's physical changes. But Amy can't ask Patrick. Once she told Patrick's physical reaction, it will be discovered that all of this was related to her. Amy didn't want to expose her true talent. Camden was finally relieved when he heard what Amy said. He looked at Patrick and told him, "Pat, the most important thing for you now is to take a good rest, sleep more, and recharge your batteries, so that you will have enough physical strength to support you when you have to have surgery in the future." Patrick echoed Camden's words, "I know, Grandpa." Amy tried to minimize her presence and stood quietly aside. Patrick had been watching Amy from the corner of his eye all the time. Seeing her like this, his eyes were dark. He seemed to have thought of something, and said, "Camden, Grandpa, I suddenly feel a little hungry. Can you bring me some food?" Camden stared at Patrick in amazement, being unable to believe what he had heard. For the first time since Patrick's accident, he offered to eat. Camden was so excited that he quickly stood up and said, "Okay, I will get it for you now. What do you want to eat? Not greasy food. Have some porridge? Patrick said. Grandpa, I can eat anything. Camden nodded repeatedly and walked out without delaying for a moment. Amy's heart trumped inexplicably, and she had a premonition. This was the first time she had been alone with Patrick since she joined the Hayden family. Amy's hands were behind her back. Her fingers twitched unconsciously to ease her uneasiness. Patrick looked directly at her face, noticing her expression for a moment. After a long while, Patrick asked, "Afraid of me?" Amy pursed her lips and shook her head. She wasn't afraid of Patrick, but the thing she did secretly made her feel guilty, which made her look weak and coward when facing him at the moment. Patrick didn't intend to expose her. At least, what he had at the moment was not enough. He looked at Amy, chuckled lightly, and said, "That's right. I'm such a useless person. I have nothing to let you be afraid of me." Hearing this, Amy raised her eyes and looked at him. Finally, she couldn't help but said, "Don't always say that. Grandpa will be sad. Moreover, such psychological hints are not good for your physical recovery." Patrick sneered, and his tone sounded lazy. "According to what you said, terminally ill patients can recover as long as they mentally hint that they are not terminal ill." Amy frowned and blurted out, "How can you be so argumentative?" Glancing at Patrick, Amy said, "Moreover, there are data to prove that patients with an optimistic attitude are indeed more likely to be cured than patients with a pessimistic one." Patrick said, "So, you're going to have me mentally say to myself 1,000 times a day that I can stand up, and then I can really do so?" Amy bit her lip, not allowing herself to answer Patrick's words. He was a contrarian at all. No matter what she said, he will continue to be unreasonable. Amy really didn't want to deal with this guy anymore. Whether he can stand up or not had nothing to do with her. Anyway, it was his own choice, and he should bear the pain himself. Seeing that Amy hadn't spoken for a long time, Patrick felt a little helpless for no reason. Above all, Amy's face at the moment clearly stated that she was unhappy, and very unhappy. Although this expression was indeed the most vivid one that appeared on her face in the past few days, Patrick just didn't want to see such an expression for no reason. He sighed softly and said, all right, I promise you, and I won't say I'm a useless person in the future." Amy moved her eyelashes, staring at Patrick for a moment, as if judging the truth of his words. Patrick was almost not angered by her expression, snorted coldly and said, "As you said, I just don't want to make Grandpa sad." Amy nodded and said, "It's best if you think like this." She did all this because she didn't want to see Camden feel bad. Camden brought the food over quickly. Because it was Patrick who took the initiative to eat, Camden did everything by himself, even running like a young man when he brought it from the kitchen. Amy helped to set the table and tried her best to be a qualified wife. Camden watched Amy take care of Patrick, and was very relieved. He did not choose the wrong granddaughter-in-law. Patrick was also surprised that Amy would take the initiative to take care of him to eat. Seeing her holding a spoon and feeding him, a feeling of strangeness welled up in his heart. This was a feeling that he had never experienced before, which made him feel very strange. However, this feeling also made him very happy. He wanted it so much, and just hold on to it so firmly. At this moment, there was an urgent voice from outside the house. "Where's Pat? I'm going to see him." Chapter 14. Call me sister-in-law. Amy paused while holding the spoon, and looked towards the door suspiciously. Riley's voice came through the unclosed door. "Miss Hayden, of course there is no problem for you to go in, but Miss Barr can't." "Riley, why are you doing this? Elsie came here with me to see Pat. She is so caring. How could you not let her in?" Casey Hayden said coquettishly. Looking at her embarrassed best friend, she was very unhappy. Although she was in awe of Riley since she was a child, she was really upset that he didn't save face for her. Riley understood Casey's temper, and said patiently, "Miss Hayden, Mr. Hayden really needs to rest. Your grandfather has explained, don't let anyone disturb his rest." "Then I can go in by myself. Elsie is not an outsider, and Grandpa is too unreasonable," Casey said. Before she opened the door and went in, she gave Elsie Bar a wink, which meant to tell her that she would call her in later. Elsie held a thermal bag in her hand, hesitated for a while, but still didn't hand it over to Casey. She cooked the food herself and had to hand it to Pat. She had heard from Casey before that Pat had barely eaten since the accident, so she went to a top chef to learn how to make soup. She believed that as long as Pat tasted the soup she made, he would definitely have appetite again. If he did so, he would also understand her attention for him. Casey opened the door and shouted enthusiastically to Patrick, "Pat, I'm here to see you." However, what responded to her was not Patrick's concern for her, but the weirdness in the room. Only then did Casey see that Patrick's bed had been raised, and he was leaning against the head of the bed. A beautiful woman was standing beside the bed, holding a bowl and spoon to feed him, and her grandfather, sitting on the sofa beside him, with a loving face, felt relieved at the scene in front of him. Casey watched all this in disbelief, and it took her a long time to react. Her brother actually allowed a strange woman to approach him. This realization made Casey feel a sense of threat. She looked at Amy angrily and asked, "Who are you? Why are you in Pat's room?" Amy didn't have a good impression of this impolite girl. Instead of answering Casey's question, she scooped up another spoonful of millet porridge and fed it to Patrick's mouth, saying softly, "Eat some more." She had discovered before that Patrick basically didn't eat much, relying on nutrient solution to support his body. This was not infeasible, but the energy that food can provide his body cannot be fully achieved by nutrient solution. Amy still hoped that Patrick can eat more. Patrick lifted his eyes slightly, looking at Amy's face, which was so close to him at the moment, so that he could see the fine fluff on her face, clean and flawless, without any makeup. However, she was so beautiful that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Amy hadn't seen Patrick's reaction for a long time, put the spoon to his lips again and asked, "What's going on? Are you full?" "Not yet," said Patrick. After he said so, he ate the porridge. There was no need to doubt about the millet porridge. He also knew that it was cooked by Riley himself, and the taste was too familiar to him. But for some reason, Patrick felt that today's porridge was extra sweet. Amy fed 3 more times in a row, and Patrick ate all the bowl of porridge. Camden's eye sockets were wet and red. He was able to see his grandson eating, and finally felt relieved a lot. Amy took out a tissue and wiped Patrick's mouth, but saw that Patrick was staring at her. She asked suspiciously, "What's wrong?" "Looks like I'm not full yet," said Patrick. What he said made everyone stunned. Even Trace and the others behind the screen couldn't believe what they heard. Camden stood up from the chair all of a sudden and said, "Aren't you full? If you're not, I will serve you another bowl." "No, I will bring you a whole pot of. Eat as much as you want." Saying that, Camden wanted to run outside. Amy stopped him. "Grandpa, don't go get it. Mr. Hayden has eaten enough." A large bowl of millet porridge was enough for a patient like Patrick who had not eaten well for a long time. Camden stopped, looked at Amy, and was about to say something when he heard Casey explode. "What's the matter with you? Didn't you hear Pat say that he's not full? It's not your food. Why do you care about it so much?" As she said that, she leaned up to Patrick and said, "Pat, do you want to eat something else?" Just in time, Elsie came here with me. She cooked soup for you. I'll ask her to come in, okay? Then Grandpa doesn't need to go to the kitchen. Patrick glanced at her coldly, saying in a chilling voice, "I said, don't bring irrelevant people to me." "Pat, how can you say that?" Casey became unhappy when she heard this. She pouted and said dissatisfiedly, "Elsie grew up with us. How can you call her irrelevant?" How heartbroken Elsie would be. Patrick didn't pay attention to Casey anymore. He had always been indifferent to his sister. Casey saw that it was useless to act coquettish, so she looked at Amy and said angrily, "Hey, who are you? Are you our new servant? Get out now." Amy tittied up the dinner plate and was about to pick it up and send it out, but she stopped when she heard Casey's words. She raised her eyes to look at Casey. With a smile, her eyes swept Casey up and down, and after a while, she said quietly, "Let me introduce myself. My name is Amy, and I am his wife. I'm your sister-in-law." Chapter 15. You really do not spoil me after all. Casey froze in place, disbelieving what she had heard. This woman who didn't look like a nice person actually brazenly said she was her sister-in-law. How could that be? Bullshit. Casey exploded immediately, pointing at Amy and yelling, "How could Pat be married? Besides, if he is married, why doesn't anyone in our family know? How shameless you are to tell such a lie." Amy turned a deaf ear to Casey's anger and just continued to say indifferently, "No, my sister, Pat and Grandpa all know it. You don't know it. Maybe it's just that you don't need to know. Casey was pissed off. This damn woman. What did she mean by saying that? Didn't that mean she was not important in the Hayden family? No one even informed her of such a big event as Patrick's marriage. She was a princess and grew up being pampered in the Hayden family. It was the first time she was wronged like this, so she couldn't bear it at all." Casey pointed at Amy. Her eyes were red with anger, but she didn't speak for a long time. Amy didn't mean to argue with Casey, but this little girl was too rude, and the meaning in her words revealed that she brought a woman over to court Patrick. Without any reason, Amy felt a surge of anger, so that she did not carry out the survival principles of the Reed family to the end, but wanted to teach this spoiled child a lesson herself, and let her understand that when she became an adult, she should know how to behave herself. So, Amy didn't care about anything and didn't save Casey's face. However, seeing Casey about to cry with anger at this moment, Amy was speechless again. She thought Casey was a savage young lady with strong fighting power, but who would have thought that she was such a weak person, and she could be so angry just by a fact narrated by her. If she really quarreled with this kid, she would have to faint from anger. Amy sighed silently, turned around to pick up the service plate. Unexpectedly, once he turned around, she met Patrick's playful eyes. Amy froze and smiled innocently at Patrick. Though she was stupid enough to bully Casey in front of her brother and grandpa, she was really restless. But what was the matter with Patrick's gaze? Why didn't she see that he meant any displeasure? On the contrary, it seemed that he still had some appreciation. Amy frowned unobtrusively with suspicion in her eyes. Was he okay? She bullied his sister, but he still admired her. He probably didn't like his sister at all. Casey felt that she had been greatly wronged, especially now. Her brother didn't even help her, but looked at the woman who bullied her affectionately. Casey burst into tears, flung himself on the sofa, hugged Camden's arm, and asked in tears, "Grandpa, am I the only one who doesn't know? Why didn't you tell me? Am I still your baby granddaughter?" Camden rubbed his forehead with a headache and said, "No, Casey, this matter is up to me and I haven't told anyone yet. You are the first one in our family to know about it." Only then did Casey calm down and stared at Camden with teary eyes. Seeing his serious face, she sniffed and asked, "Really? Of course it's true. How could I lie to you?" said Camden. Casey pursed her mouth and said, "Then why don't you discuss it with me and let Pat get married? You really don't spoil me anymore." Camden had nothing to do with this granddaughter, so he could only look at Patrick for help. An entire Hayden family, except for Patrick, no one can subdue Casey. Patrick raised his eyebrows at Camden, and his eyes seemed to say, "You deserve it." Even he, the person involved, was not notified, so he directly got a wife, not to mention the rest of the Hayden family. Now only Casey knew, and soon everyone in the Hayden family will know. Patrick wanted to see how his dear grandpa will deal with it himself at that time. Camden was about to be pissed off by Patrick. With his temper, Camden pulled Casey away and said, "This is what I decided. I can say it if I want, and I don't want to say it if I don't want to. The family still has me in charge. How about that? What do you want to do about me?" Chapter 16, How Can You Be Shameless to This Extent? As soon as he said so, the room had a strange silence in an instant, and you could even hear a needle drop to the ground. Casey couldn't keep messing around anymore, swallowed hard, and held back her tears. After a long time, Casey only said a few words, "Grandpa, you are so willful." Patrick also looked away speechless, but still couldn't hold back and blurted out, "As long as you are happy. Anyway, you don't have to care about the feelings of a useless person like me." Almost immediately, Patrick's mouth was covered with a white hand. Amy glared at Patrick and felt annoyed, suddenly wanting to sew his mouth shut. She said displeasedly, "Did you forget you had promised me something? How can you lie to me?" Patrick looked up at Amy. Her hand was still covering her mouth, and his breath was filled with the aroma of her fingers. From Amy's tone, she clearly regarded him as an ignorant child, like a parent educating her kid. Suddenly, a smile appeared in Patrick's eyes. He said, "I was wrong, and I won't say it in the future." Since his mouth was still covered by Amy, Patrick's voice was muffled, but it didn't affect his pleasant voice. In particular, when he spoke, his breath fell on Amy's palm, making her already sensitive skin itchy instantly, as if an electric current passed through the palm and flowed into the body. Amy withdrew her hand abruptly, put her hands behind her back, and rubbed them uncomfortably. She looked away and said, "I just don't want to make Grandpa sad." Amy's voice was very low, and only Patrick could hear her words. Patrick looked towards Camden. Seeing the obviously hurt look on his face, he regretted it for a while. Just now, he really shouldn't have said that. This old man had already done enough for him. Although he found him a wife without asking him, this matter really made him very unhappy. However, Patrick was not unacceptable to this. Above all, Amy seemed to be a woman who hid a lot of secrets, and she always did some weird things secretly, so he can't help but want to know all the little secrets she hid and see what kind of woman she was. Patrick even felt that if it was another woman, he might really be angry with Grandpa for a long time, but now, since it was Amy, he still thought it was pretty good. Thinking of this, Patrick said to Camden, "Grandpa, I don't mean to blame you." Camden was indeed a little sad, and worried that he did not take into account his grandson's wishes, so he forced Amy to him. He wondered whether it was a correct thing to do. Just now, when he saw Amy losing her temper with Patrick, he didn't worry anymore. He believed more and more that Amy was the one who could change his grandson. Patrick may not be cured in his lifetime, but Camden will not treat him as a useless person. He will give him the best. Camden said, "Pat, I know that it's really capricious for me to make decisions without discussing with you. I don't ask for anything else. I just hope you don't blame Amy. She was also forced by me." Patrick didn't speak, but looked at Amy again. He was very curious that his grandpa obviously didn't know anything about Amy, so how could he value her so much? The moment he brought her to Hayden's mansion, he could feel his grandfather's protection of Amy, telling him not to bully her. Why? Patrick's curiosity about Amy became even stronger. Amy was uncomfortable being stared at by Patrick, and besides, she didn't want to pay attention to him just yet. She finally picked up the plate, turned around and walked towards the door. Casey, who had been silent by the side since just now, finally made a new move. She stood in front of Amy, didn't speak, but just stared at Amy. She was more puzzled than Patrick. What was the origin of Amy and what kind of magical power she had that made her grandfather and Pat treat her so well? Especially Patrick. If she read correctly just now, Pat smiled at this woman. Even she rarely saw Patrick smile. This woman, why? Amy looked at Casey speechlessly, and seeing that she didn't intend to give way, she pushed the dinner plate into Casey's hand and said, "Want to help me? Then help me so." Casey didn't react at all, but instinctively protected the plate from falling to the floor. Unexpectedly, Amy really pushed the dinner plate to her like that, then turned around and back to the bed. Casey's eyes widened with anger, and she didn't speak for a long time. She had never seen such a woman before. How can she be so shameless? She strode towards Amy, held the plate in one hand, and was about to grab Amy's shoulder with the other, trying to turn her around. She was the young lady of the Hayden family. She had been treated as a princess since she was born. She had never even taken a broom once. This was the first time she was called to do chores. How could she bear this kind of grievance? However, as if Amy had eyes on the back of her head, at the moment Casey was about to touch her, she moved to the side and missed Casey's touch. Casey almost fell due to inertia, hurriedly protected the dinner plate, and stomped her feet angrily. "What's the matter with? How can you give me thing?" Casey pushed the dinner plate towards Amy, as if to argue with her. Amy didn't have much patience with her, So she glanced at her lightly and said, "Since you care about your brother so much, shouldn't it be right to help him? Why are you blaming me now?"